The emergency lights flickered, casting momentary shadows across the blood-spattered floor of Bunker C-17. Sergeant Kai Mercer tried to move his leg and immediately regretted it. White-hot pain shot through his body, a reminder of the Vorax energy blast that had nearly severed his left thigh during the first counterattack. His combat suit's medical system had managed to seal the wound and pump him full of stimulants, but the suit's power cells were fading. Soon, the pain management protocols would fail completely. Through the dim light, he could see the bunker's reinforced walls designed to withstand orbital bombardment, but now cracking under the pressure of the Vorax assault. Dust and small debris rained from the ceiling with each distant explosion. 14 days since the human alliance had established the forward base on Iridia 12, and 12 days since it all went to hell. Kai shifted his weight, reaching for the portable terminal embedded in his armor's gauntlet. The display flickered to life, bathing his face in a pale blue glow that emphasized the deep circles under his eyes and the dried blood caked on his cheek. The terminal displayed the same message it had shown for the past 6 hours. Emergency Protocol Alpha 7. All communications suspended. Standby for extraction. He knew it was a lie. There would be no extraction. Not after what he'd heard through the command channel before it went silent. "This is Colonel Reeves." The message had crackled through static. "Vorax forces have overrun sectors 1 through 6. All personnel in underground bunkers are presumed KIA. Initiating Protocol Sundown. May God help us all." Protocol Sundown. The complete lockdown of all defensive systems pending total evacuation, or more likely, total annihilation. It meant that even if someone did survive in the underground network, the Alliance considered them already dead. Kai stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant rumble of explosions. Above him, through meters of rock and metal, the Vorax were establishing their dominance over what remained of the Alliance's forward base. How many of his fellow soldiers were still alive? Probably none. The thought should have broken him, but instead a strange calm settled over his mind. If they thought he was dead, then he was already a ghost. And ghosts could move freely. With trembling hands, Kai pulled himself toward the bunker's emergency kit. Inside, he found what he needed: an old-style manual hydraulic jack designed for clearing debris in case of tunnel collapse. His engineering background might be the only thing keeping him alive now. He positioned the jack against the bunker's sealed door. The locking mechanism had engaged when Protocol Sundown activated, but the mechanism was mechanical, reliant on pressure pins that could be forced with enough strength. Gritting his teeth against the pain, Kai began pumping the handle. Each movement sent agony through his injured leg, but he continued watching as the metal door slowly began to distort. After 20 minutes of grueling effort, the pressure pins snapped with a sound like gunshots. The door shifted, allowing a thin stream of stale air from the maintenance tunnel beyond to filter through. Kai collapsed backward, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The first obstacle overcome, but at what cost? The wound on his leg had reopened, fresh blood seeping through the temporary seal. Kai reactivated his suit's medical systems, diverting power from non-essential functions. The diagnostic scan was grim: severe tissue damage, potential nerve impairment, and signs of infection beginning to set in. Without proper medical attention, he'd be lucky to last another day. But there was no proper medical attention coming. As the suit's nanobinders resealed his wound, Kai's thoughts drifted to Dr. Lena Cho, the base's chief medical officer. Her face appeared in his mind, stern, yet compassionate, with those intelligent eyes that always saw right through any soldier's bravado. During his orientation, she had told him something he'd never forgotten. The body gives up long before the mind does. Remember that when everything seems hopeless. Well, Dr. Cho, Kai thought grimly, let's see if you were right. With renewed determination, he pushed against the distorted door. It moved grudgingly, scraping against the floor, and creating an opening just wide enough for him to squeeze through. The maintenance tunnel beyond was pitch black, the emergency lighting having failed days ago. Kai activated his suit's low-light vision, draining precious power, but giving him a ghostly green view of his surroundings. The tunnel stretched in both directions, littered with fallen pipes and shattered concrete. To his right, he knew lay the primary access shaft that led to the surface, and certain death at the hands of the Vorax patrols. To his left was the deeper network of maintenance tunnels that connected to the base's core systems, water reclamation, power distribution, and most importantly, the server hub that controlled the base's automated defenses. Defenses that were currently locked down under Protocol Sundown. Kai dragged himself left, keeping his weight off his injured leg as much as possible. The suit's combat stimulants were keeping him alert, but he knew that was another temporary measure. Eventually, his body would crash, and hard. He needed to find shelter supplies and a way to assess the situation above. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes, according to his suit's chronometer, Kai reached a junction in the tunnel network. A faded schematic on the wall showed his location relative to the main facilities. The server hub was still 2 levels down, but there was something closer that caught his attention. Maintenance Bay 3, one of the secondary repair facilities for the base's automated defense drones. If he could reach it, there might be tools, power cells, and perhaps even functional communication equipment. The bay was designed to operate independently from the main systems in case of emergency, exactly the situation he now faced. Kai checked his suit's power levels, down to 17%. Not enough to maintain life support and medical functions for much longer. He needed to hurry. The descent to Maintenance Bay 3 was agonizingly slow. Twice he had to stop and manually override security doors, and once he narrowly avoided a section of tunnel that had completely collapsed. When he finally reached the bay's entrance, he found it partially blocked by debris, the result of what appeared to be an internal explosion. Squeezing through a narrow gap in the wreckage, Kai entered the bay and immediately froze. There, illuminated by the eerie green glow of his vision system, were the remains of 3 Vorax soldiers. Their chitinous exoskeletons were shattered, dark ichorous fluid pooled beneath their grotesque forms. One still clutched a plasma cutter, the likely source of the explosion that had killed them. Kai's initial shock gave way to grim satisfaction. The Vorax had made it this far into the tunnels, but had apparently triggered some kind of defense or accident. Their misfortune was his opportunity. Moving carefully around the alien corpses, he made his way to the bay's central console. To his surprise and relief, the console had its own backup power supply. When he activated it, soft blue lights flickered on throughout the bay, revealing workbenches, lined with tools, spare parts, and most precious of all, a rack of fresh power cells. Kai quickly replaced his suit's failing cell with a new one. Immediately, the medical systems increased their effectiveness, flooding his body with painkillers and antibacterial agents. The relief was so intense that he nearly blacked out, sagging against the console as his vision swam. When he regained his composure, Kai took stock of his surroundings more thoroughly. The maintenance bay was designed to service the Alliance's Aegis drones, hovering spherical units, equipped with small-caliber weapons and basic repair tools. None of the drones appeared functional, but their components were scattered across the workbenches in various states of disassembly. Something else caught his eye, a Combat Pack Standard Alliance issue propped against one of the benches. It belonged to one of his fellow engineers, though there was no sign of them now. Inside, he found an emergency ration pack, a portable water purifier, and most valuable of all, a tactical datapad. Unlike his armor's limited terminal, the datapad was designed for field operations and technical work. If he could get it online, it might give him access to the base's systems, even under lockdown. Kai connected the datapad to his suit's diagnostic port, using his authorization codes to bypass the initial security. The screen flickered to life, displaying the Alliance logo, before transitioning to a warning message. Warning protocol. Sundown active. All defense systems locked. Manual override required. That was both good and bad news. Good because it meant the systems weren't completely destroyed, just locked down. Bad, because a manual override would require physical access to the server hub 2 levels further down and likely guarded by more Vorax patrols. As Kai contemplated his next move, a crackling sound emanated from a damaged communications panel on the wall. At first, it was just static, but then words became discernible, spoken in the harsh, clicking language of the Vorax. His suit's translation software kicked in. Section 12B clear. No survivors found. Continuing to deep scan for human life signs. They were hunting for survivors, and they were getting closer. Kai quickly gathered what he could from the maintenance bay tools that could double as weapons, spare power cells, and components that might prove useful. He loaded everything into the combat pack, secured the datapad to his armor, and prepared to move out. But first, he had an idea. The dead Vorax soldiers still had their communication devices, small crystalline implants embedded in what passed for their ears. If he could extract one intact, he might be able to monitor their transmissions directly. With a combat knife, Kai carefully cut into the least damaged Vorax corpse, trying not to think about the alien fluids that coated his gloves as he worked. The implant came free with a wet sucking sound. He connected it to the datapad using the bay's tools to create a makeshift interface. The effect was immediate. His datapad lit up with Vorax communications patrol routes, status reports, and command directives. Most critical of all was a complete map of their positions throughout the base. The server hub, his primary objective, was indeed guarded 4 Vorax soldiers stationed outside the main entrance. But there was another way. The maintenance tunnels included emergency access shafts that ran alongside the main corridors designed for technicians to reach critical systems during lockdowns. According to the Vorax communications, they were unaware of these access points. It was his way in. Before leaving the maintenance bay, Kai noticed something else among the Aegis drone components: explosive charges used for clearing debris during rescue operations. They weren't military grade, but in the right location, they could cause significant damage or create one hell of a distraction. Kai stuffed several of the charges into his pack. Then, setting his jaw against the pain that still radiated from his leg, despite the increased medication, he headed for the access shaft that would take him down to the server level. The shaft was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to navigate. It consisted of a series of ladders and platforms descending vertically through the base's infrastructure. For someone with 2 functioning legs, it would have been challenging. For Kai, it was torture. Each rung down sent fresh waves of agony through his injured limb. Twice, he nearly fell, catching himself at the last moment. By the time he reached the bottom, his suit's medical system was working overtime to compensate for his elevated heart rate and the reopened wound. The access point to the server level was secured by a maintenance hatch. Through it, Kai could hear the distinctive clicking sounds of Vorax soldiers patrolling nearby. He checked his datapad, confirming their positions relative to his own. 4 of them, as expected, guarding the main entrance. But they were stationary, not actively patrolling the corridors. Kai consulted the base schematics on his datapad. The server hub was a large circular room with multiple server banks arranged like spokes around a central control console. The maintenance hatch would put him near the rear of the room, away from the main entrance. If he could enter quietly and stay hidden among the server banks, he might be able to reach the central console undetected. Taking a deep breath, Kai slowly turned the manual release on the hatch. It opened with a soft hiss of hydraulics, revealing a dimly lit space beyond. The servers were still operational, their status lights blinking in the darkness. The Vorax needed them intact to access Alliance data. Kai slipped through the hatch, closing it silently behind him. The server room was cooler than the maintenance tunnels, the air circulating through filtration systems designed to keep the delicate equipment from overheating. The low hum of machinery masked his movements as he crept between the towering server banks. From his position, he could see the main entrance through gaps in the equipment. As his datapad had indicated, 4 Vorax soldiers stood guard, 2 directly at the door, 2 more positioned at consoles near the central hub. Their exoskeletons gleamed under the emergency lighting, the organic-mechanical hybrid armor that made them such formidable opponents. Kai knew he couldn't take them in direct combat, not in his condition, and not without proper weapons. But he had something else: knowledge of the systems and a plan forming in his mind. The central console controlled not just the servers, but all connected systems, including the base's defense grid, currently locked down under Protocol Sundown. If he could reach it and execute a manual override, he might be able to reactivate at least some of the defenses. But first, he needed a distraction. Kai reached into his pack and removed one of the explosive charges he'd taken from the maintenance bay. He set the timer for 60 seconds, then carefully placed it at the base of a server bank on the opposite side of the room from where he intended to go. The charge wasn't powerful enough to destroy the server, just enough to create smoke noise and confusion. With the charge set, Kai moved back into position, readying himself for what would come next. When the explosion came, it was louder than he'd anticipated, echoing through the circular chamber. Alarms immediately began blaring, and emergency fire suppression systems activated, spraying chemical retardant into the air. The Vorax guards reacted immediately, 3 of them moving toward the source of the explosion, while 1 remained at the central console. It was the opening Kai needed. Moving as quickly as his injured leg would allow, he slipped through the confusion toward the central console. The remaining Vorax guard was focused on the emergency systems, attempting to override the fire suppression. It never saw Kai coming. Using a heavy wrench from his pack, Kai struck the Vorax at the base of its cranial ridge, the closest thing they had to a vulnerable spot. The alien crumpled, its exoskeleton cracking under the force of the blow. Kai pushed the unconscious or dead Vorax aside and took its place at the console. His hands flew over the controls, inputting his engineering override codes. The system resisted at first, Protocol Sundown preventing any easy access. But Kai had spent years working with these systems. He knew their weaknesses, their backdoors, the ways that engineers had built in failsafes that even command protocols couldn't completely lock out. After tense seconds that felt like hours, the console displayed a new message. Emergency override accepted, awaiting command authorization. On the other side of the room, the Vorax guards had discovered the explosive device and were now scanning the server hub, their weapons raised. It would only be moments before they spotted him. Kai entered the final command sequence, his fingers trembling with urgency. "Protocol Phoenix initiated," the console responded. "Defense systems coming online. Warning: system integrity compromised. Full functionality not guaranteed." It was enough. Before the Vorax could reach him, Kai dropped to the floor behind the console, pulling the unconscious alien's body over him as makeshift cover. The overhead lights suddenly shifted from emergency red to full brightness, momentarily blinding the Vorax soldiers. Then, from recessed compartments in the walls, automated defense turrets emerged, small, rapid-fire weapons designed to protect the server hub from intruders. They had been installed as a last line of defense, separate from the main defense grid, and thus not fully integrated into Protocol Sundown. The turrets opened fire on the Vorax guards. 2 fell immediately, their exoskeletons no match for the concentrated fire at close range. The 3rd managed to take cover behind a server bank, returning fire and destroying one of the turrets. Kai used the chaos to access the command console more deeply. Protocol Phoenix was an emergency reboot sequence, but it was meant to be coordinated across all base systems simultaneously. With the base fragmented under Vorax control, the protocol was executing piecemeal system by system. He needed to direct it to prioritize the systems that would give him the greatest advantage. First, he activated the emergency lighting throughout the maintenance tunnel network. If any other Alliance personnel had survived in the tunnels, they would now be able to navigate more easily. Next, he targeted the internal security system's motion sensors, automated doors, and the remaining defense turrets scattered throughout the base's interior spaces. The console chimed, indicating successful activation of these systems. But Kai knew it wasn't enough. He needed to strike at the Vorax more directly to disrupt their control of the base above. That's when he noticed an alert on a secondary display. Munitions depot alpha status intact. Remote detonation protocol available. Depot Alpha was one of several armories positioned throughout the base, containing everything from small arms to heavy explosives. If it was still intact, the Vorax had either missed it or were planning to use its contents themselves. Either way, it represented an opportunity. Kai activated the remote detonation protocol, but rather than triggering it immediately, he set a timer for 10 minutes. Then, he accessed the base's internal communication system, hacking into the channels the Vorax were using for coordination. Using the translation software from his suite, Kai composed a message in the Vorax language and broadcast it across their frequencies. Alert: human resistance forces detected in Sector 7. All available units respond. Sector 7 was on the opposite side of the base from Munitions Depot Alpha. With luck, the false alert would draw Vorax forces away from the armory before the detonation. The remaining Vorax guard in the server hub was still exchanging fire with the automated turrets. Kai knew he couldn't stay much longer. Once the Vorax realized what was happening with their communications, they would trace the source back to the server hub. There was one more system he needed to access before escaping the base's long-range communications array. If he could send a message to Alliance Command, there might still be a chance for evacuation or reinforcement. The communication system was heavily damaged, but a diagnostic scan showed that the emergency beacon was still functional. Kai activated it, setting it to broadcast a repeating message on the Alliance emergency frequency. Iridia 12 forward base, still operational. Vorax forces engaged. Request immediate assistance. Whether anyone would receive it or respond was another matter entirely, but it was all he could do. With his tasks completed, Kai prepared to retreat back to the maintenance tunnels. The firefight between the Vorax guard and the defense turrets was still ongoing, providing cover for his escape. But as he moved toward the maintenance hatch, a stray shot from the Vorax's weapon struck a nearby server bank, sending a shower of sparks and debris over Kai. A sharp piece of metal sliced through his armor at the shoulder, embedding itself deep in his flesh. Kai stifled a cry of pain, knowing any sound might give away his position. His suit's medical system immediately registered the new injury, diverting resources to prevent blood loss. Despite the fresh wound, Kai managed to reach the maintenance hatch. As he slipped through, the last sounds he heard from the server hub were the continued exchange of weapons fire and a new alarm blaring. Warning! Critical system. Failure imminent. Evacuate immediately. Back in the narrow access shaft, Kai began the painful climb up the ladder. Each movement sent fresh waves of agony through both his leg and now his shoulder. But the alternative was death at the hands of the Vorax, or in the potential collapse of the server level. He had barely ascended one level when a massive explosion shook the entire shaft. The server hub's critical systems had failed catastrophically, probably due to damage sustained during the firefight. The maintenance hatch below him buckled inward, and a rush of superheated air shot up the shaft. Kai clung to the ladder, waiting for the shockwave to pass. When it did, he continued his ascent, now moving with even greater urgency. The destruction of the server hub would alert all Vorax forces to his presence, and in less than 7 minutes, Munitions Depot Alpha would detonate, potentially causing even more significant structural damage to the base. His destination was clear the surface. With the defense systems partially reactivated and chaos soon to spread among the Vorax forces, it might be his only chance to assess the true situation above ground and potentially find a way off this doomed base. As Kai reached Maintenance Bay 3 again, he paused to catch his breath and check his datapad. The Vorax communications were in disarray, with multiple units responding to his false alert about human resistance in Sector 7. Others were reporting the destruction of the server hub and the activation of internal defenses throughout the tunnel network. He had succeeded in creating confusion, but it wouldn't last long. The Vorax command would soon realize they were being manipulated and would adapt their strategy. Checking the timer for the munitions depot detonation, Kai saw he had just under 5 minutes left. He needed to move quickly, but also to plan his route carefully. The most direct path to the surface was through the primary access shaft, but that would likely be heavily guarded now. He needed an alternative. The datapad showed another possibility, an emergency evacuation shaft designed for base personnel to reach the surface quickly during catastrophic failures. It was further from his current position, but potentially less guarded than the main access points. Gathering his remaining strength, Kai moved out of the maintenance bay and back into the tunnel network, now illuminated by the emergency lighting he had reactivated. He followed the schematics on his datapad, navigating through corridors that showed signs of recent combat scorch marks on the walls, spent ammunition casings, and occasionally the bodies of Alliance soldiers who had fallen defending the base. Each fallen comrade he passed strengthened his resolve. They had died fighting, believing the base was lost. He would prove otherwise. As he approached the evacuation shaft, Kai's datapad chimed with an alert. The Vorax communications indicated they had discovered his deception regarding Sector 7 and were now conducting a methodical search of the entire tunnel network. They knew someone had activated the defense systems and were determined to find them. Kai reached the evacuation shaft just as his timer showed 1 minute remaining until the munitions depot detonation. The shaft was sealed by an emergency bulkhead designed to prevent pressure loss during an evacuation. To open it, he would need to activate the emergency protocols from a nearby control panel. As he approached the panel, Kai heard the distinctive sound of Vorax communications from around a bend in the corridor. A patrol was approaching, likely drawn by the active emergency lighting. With no time to hide, Kai made a split-second decision. He triggered one of his remaining explosive charges, tossing it around the corner toward the approaching patrol. The explosion was followed by alien screams and the sound of collapsing tunnel sections. Using the momentary confusion, Kai activated the emergency evacuation protocol at the control panel. The bulkhead hissed open, revealing a vertical shaft with a series of handholds leading upward. Unlike the maintenance shafts, this one was designed for rapid ascent with mechanical assists to help injured personnel reach the surface. Kai entered the shaft just as the timer on his datapad reached 0. The entire base shuddered as Munitions Depot Alpha detonated. The force of the explosion was far greater than Kai had anticipated, suggesting that the Vorax had indeed been storing additional weaponry there. The evacuation shaft swayed dangerously, debris falling from above as the structure of the base shifted under the stress. Kai activated the mechanical assist, a simple pulley system that helped take his weight as he climbed. Even with the assistance, each handhold was a battle against his failing strength and increasing injuries. As he ascended, his datapad continued to relay Vorax communications. They were in full retreat from sections of the base near the munitions depot, which had apparently triggered secondary explosions in adjacent areas. The confusion was spreading, with multiple Vorax units reporting attacks from reactivated defense systems throughout the facility. Halfway up the shaft, Kai's mechanical assist failed the system, damaged by the structural stress on the base. He was forced to continue under his own power, his wounded shoulder screaming in protest with each upward movement. The air in the shaft grew hotter and filled with dust as he approached the surface. Through gaps in the shaft's structure, he could see fires raging in parts of the base above, the result of the cascading explosions triggered by the munitions depot. When Kai finally reached the surface access point, he found it partially blocked by collapsed ceiling panels. Using the last of his explosive charges, he cleared a path, the controlled detonation barely registering amid the chaos engulfing the base. He emerged onto the surface of Iridia 12 for the first time in days. The red desert stretched before him, its dunes illuminated by the fires consuming what remained of the Alliance forward base. The air was thick with smoke and the distinctive ozone smell of energy weapons discharge. Through the haze, Kai could see Vorax ships lifting off transport vessels and fighter craft abandoning their positions as the base's automated defenses turned against them. In the distance, the imposing form of a Vorax command ship was already breaking atmosphere, its commanders apparently deciding that the base was no longer worth the cost of holding. Kai staggered away from the access point, seeking cover behind a partially collapsed perimeter wall. His suit's power was waning again, the medical system struggling to compensate for his accumulated injuries. But he had succeeded beyond his wildest hopes. The Vorax were retreating. As the dawn light of Iridia's sun broke over the horizon, Kai activated the emergency beacon in his suit, broadcasting his position on Alliance frequencies. It was a risk any remaining Vorax forces might detect it too, but it was his only chance for rescue now. He sat with his back against the crumbling wall, watching as more Vorax ships fled the devastation below. The base's defensive turrets, those that remained operational, continued to fire at the retreating aliens, adding to their disarray. Kai's thoughts turned to Dr. Lena Cho again. "The body gives up long before the mind does," she had said. She had been right. By all physical measures, he should have died in that emergency bunker days ago. Instead, through sheer force of will and the technical knowledge that had always been his strength, he had turned a desperate situation into an unlikely victory. As consciousness began to fade, Kai's datapad picked up a new signal. Not Vorax this time, but Alliance. A response to his emergency beacon. "Sergeant Mercer, this is Captain Reynolds of the Alliance cruiser Dauntless. We've received your signal and are dispatching recovery teams. Hold position." Kai managed a weak smile as his eyes began to close. They had received his message. The Alliance was coming back for what remained of the base, and for him, the ghost they had left behind. When he awoke, it was to the sterile white interior of a medical bay aboard an Alliance vessel. His body felt oddly distant, the result of heavy pain medication and advanced surgical procedures. A medical officer, not Dr. Cho, but someone wearing the same uniform, was checking his vitals. "He's awake!" the officer called to someone outside Kai's field of vision. "Sergeant Mercer, can you hear me?" Kai tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. A moment later, a familiar face appeared above him. Colonel Reeves, the same officer who had initiated Protocol Sundown, believing all personnel in the underground bunkers were lost. "Sergeant Reeves," said his voice a mixture of disbelief and respect. "You shouldn't be alive. None of the bunker personnel survived the initial Vorax assault." Kai managed to croak out a response, "Wasn't meant to survive." The colonel nodded solemnly. "No, you weren't. Yet somehow you not only survived, but managed to activate enough of our defensive systems to force a complete Vorax withdrawal. We've retaken the base, what's left of it, and secured a perimeter. Intelligence is already harvesting Vorax technology they left behind in their retreat." With effort, Kai formed his next question, "Others?" Reeves's expression darkened. "You're the only survivor from the underground sections. We've recovered the bodies of your team from Bunker C-17. They didn't make it through the initial attack." The news hit Kai like a physical blow. He had hoped somehow that others might have found ways to survive as he had. To know he was truly the only one left alive was a hollow victory. "How did you do it, Sergeant?" Reeves asked. "Our techs are still trying to piece together what happened, but from what we can tell, you executed a coordinated attack across multiple systems simultaneously. You turned the base's own infrastructure against the Vorax." Kai closed his eyes, the memories washing over him, the pain, the desperation, the moment-by-moment decisions that had led him from certain death to unlikely triumph. "One step at a time," he finally answered. "They thought I was already dead." Colonel Reeves nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "So they never saw you coming, the ghost in the machine." "Sir," the medical officer interrupted, "he needs rest. The surgeons have repaired the worst of the damage, but he's still in critical condition." Reeves straightened, adjusting his uniform. "Of course. Rest, Sergeant. When you're recovered, Alliance Command will want a full debriefing. What you've done, what you've accomplished against impossible odds, it's extraordinary." As the colonel turned to leave, Kai found his voice one more time. "Sir, Dr. Cho." Reeves paused his back to Kai. "Dr. Cho was on the last evacuation shuttle. She made it out. I'll let her know you're alive. She'll be relieved." With that, the colonel left and the medical officer administered another dose of pain medication. As the drug took effect, Kai felt himself drifting back toward unconsciousness. But it was different now. Not the desperate fight against encroaching darkness he had experienced in the tunnels, but a peaceful release, knowing he had done more than merely survive. He had turned the tide of battle through his own knowledge, determination, and refusal to accept defeat. And in doing so, he had honored the sacrifice of those who hadn't made it. As sleep claimed him, Kai's last conscious thought was of the Iridia 12 forward base, now a burning ruin, but still in Alliance hands. The Vorax had learned a costly lesson. Never assume your enemy is defeated until you've confirmed it with your own eyes. And sometimes, the most dangerous enemy is the one you've already counted as dead. The one who wasn't meant to survive.